Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be using a new art material and something that I've not ever used before, trying it for the first time, which is this Daler-Rowney System 3 acrylic ink. I saw this when we went to London and I was browsing London Graphic Centre and I was really intrigued by this. I've seen it used a lot on the internet and on YouTube and TikTok, and I've never used anything like this before. I often use acrylic paints, but this is very different to that. It's more like a watercolour almost, especially in the way that you can water it down, which is obviously not like acrylic paint at all. The colour I got was phthalo green, and it's a really gorgeous greeny turquoise. It's got a little dropper on it, and I put a few drops into my plastic paint palette and I added some water to it just to water it down and create sort of different shades almost. And then I'm just practicing on this little scrap bit of paper just to see how it works before I go on to my final piece. I didn't do this for long, I was quite eager just to get going and work with it, and I was tempted to look up online how to actually use it first and see how I should do it, but I just decided to experiment and I just went straight in. So it was definitely more like watercolour. As you can see here, it blends really nicely with water and you can layer it up. So I obviously have the really dark one, which is basically straight from the bottle, and then the one where I've mixed in more and more water. So the piece that I'm creating today was part of the Peachtober challenge on Instagram, and this was for the prompt called Frog. I thought it would be a really good prompt to try this out on, because obviously it's a very greeny sort of blue ink. It looks more green in the bottle, and when I'm using it here you can see that it's a really deep turquoise sort of colour. It's quite different depending on how much you water it down, as you can tell. And I also used this really thin new paintbrush, which again I bought in London, and that's a Daler-Rowney Graduate Size 2 rigger brush. It didn't work so well on like the bigger areas. You can really see my brush strokes there, and I think that's where you can tell the difference between normal ink and acrylic ink. When I water it down it definitely feels more like watercolour, but it's really good pigment. It's really smooth to use, works really well with the water, and it would make really lovely gradients. Definitely something that I need to practice on, because you can see my brush strokes in a lot of it. But I think with more practice I think it would be a really interesting material to use, and I think it would layer up really nicely. So I tried to do that on the water here. I obviously did the first layer, which was really pale, and then I tried to do sort of water effects over the top, and I didn't do it very well. It's definitely something I think I can practice more on, but I think it would be really interesting to use that sort of technique again in the future, especially for creating water scenes. So acrylic ink is much more pigmented compared to normal ink, and it's also supposed to be really light fast in comparison. So to add all the extra details on top, I'm just using my Himi gouache set and picking a couple of colours from there and adding on all the details. I really wanted the frog to stand out, so I chose a yellow sort of green for this, and then I really like the way the pink flowers look against the greeny blue. So I'm using a much thicker brush for here, and for the extra details I'm going back to the really thin brush. So as with most of my art pieces, I'm finishing it off with more details using Prismacolor coloured pencils and just adding on some texture onto the frog, adding some pink highlights, which I really love the way that looks against the green of his body, adding in the texture on his back and the eyes, and then coming back with some white gouache and adding in some little sparkle bits around the lily pads. The finish of the acrylic ink was quite glossy. You can kind of see that here, but it also shows the bloom from the water where I added it with the acrylic ink, and I think it gives a really lovely effect. I've only got the one acrylic ink for now, but I think it would be really interesting to see how it mixes with other colours. I think they're £4 to £5 a bottle, so they're not cheap as with most art supplies, and I just wanted to try it out and see how it worked. I'm not sure that I'd want to get all of the different colours. I might get one more bottle just to see how it works together, but I think I prefer just using thicker paint like gouache. It was really interesting to see. A lot of my painting techniques don't use layers, and I think this would work really well if your artwork does. Watercolour is one of those things that I definitely want to practice on, and this feels very similar to that in terms of using it very differently to acrylic and gouache and being able to work it up with lots of different layers and different opacities. So I think if that was the style I wanted to go down, then this would be a really good medium to experiment with it. So I also added on some lines with the coloured pencils onto the lily pads, and I'm really glad I did this. Definitely added some extra texture, and I almost didn't add it because I didn't want to ruin it, and it was definitely a risk, but I think it paid off. I'm just taking off the painter's tape here, which creates a really nice edge, and I'm really pleased with how it ended up. I'd love to hear what you think down below, and if you like this, then please do check out the other videos on my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.